Zhang Jue is a very weird servant. On the one hand, I think he has some very strong skills at his disposal, but then on the other hand, they definitely missed in some aspects of his kit. For one, I think his overcharge should be stackable. I think that would help out in the damage department, and they definitely could have given him larger values on some of his card buffs, and that would also help him out with his damage, because that seems to be the common complaint with him, which I do understand. You know, he's a low rarity AoE unit. You would think, oh, this is a guy I'm going to be able to use kind of like Ku Caster to help me get through some of this farming content, especially because he's a quick unit. We could desperately use a very strong looping quick servant. And while he can do that, I imagine you're going to need some pretty good setup to actually pull that off in any meaningful capacity in, you know, your even normal level 90 nodes, because his damage is quite low. But again, his skills are very, very strong, so I think he's a servant worth looking at and maybe trying out for yourself as well. But he is one of those servants that I think we're waiting on one good buff to really set them on the right path to being a strong free-to-play servant, because he is on every single banner. Unlike someone like, say, Ku Caster, he is a generic banner unit that you'll be able to pull on any banner. So hopefully it's maybe just a skill 1 buff that they'll, you know, maybe buff in the future, which we'll talk about when we get to his skills, some ideas that I have for that. Or worst case scenario, they could just buff the NP and give it higher scaling to maybe help him out a little bit more, maybe up that overcharge a little bit, making it stackable. Something along those lines could really help him out in a meaningful capacity. But before we begin, if you enjoy these daily FGO videos, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for that daily FGO content. And if you like being informed on the goings-on on both versions of the game, that being both the NA and JP side of things. But with that being said, let's start getting right into his kit, starting off with his hits, of which they're pretty strong, although I will note right off the bat, bro is only rocking that 4-hit extra attack, which does immediately dock him some points in my book, because if you're unaware, you're just uninitiated, the extra attack is a composite card that gen stars NP and does big boy damage, and because he's a free-to-play, you should have no problem getting his append skill up to make that extra attack even stronger, but at only 4, I don't know, man. We'd like to at least see that 5 hits on the extra attack, but his other hits are rather solid. 4 hits on both of the quick cards, 3 on both of his arts cards, with a respectable 0.61% NP gain. He can get some decent refund off, especially because you probably are going to be critting with him, even though his star gen's not the craziest. With the buff we're going to be getting for quick chains and the fact that he has an AoE quick NP, you should always have a decent bit of stars at your disposal, especially since by the time we get the quick buff, we'll also be getting Ruler Scotty around that time, who can help out characters like this that aren't meant to be real star geners and might not be able to hit 50 stars every single time by dropping some stars of our own. So even if your Zhang Jue is only hitting like 40 stars dropped or 30 stars dropped, Ruler Scotty will help you out with that. Although I will say that even though his NP gain and his hits on his cards should allow him to be a really good refunding machines on his face cards, especially with those crits, because of, and I guess we'll just get into it right here, his skill 1 being so low, that does mean that he's not really getting a lot of oomph behind both his quick and his arts cards in regards of NP gain. But because they're only 20%, they do apply to the entire party, which is where I think this guy is kind of interesting, because maybe his damage is a little bit lower because they want you to kind of use him as a pseudo support, someone you could just plug suit in, which I think is a very interesting idea, especially if maybe you have a weaker box. Because sometimes getting that 20% quick or arts buff for whether you're using an arts or a quick unit can make the difference between you looping enough by getting that little bit of extra NP gain out of your quick and arts cards, or a little bit of damage to get to those overkill hits to get that extra refund. I think it's a very interesting idea, but I would like to see them throw something on here to maybe allow Zhang Jue himself to have a little bit more oomph. They did give him Territory Creation B, which does make his arts cards go up to 28%, but we don't have anything else for the quick cards, and he is, unfortunately, a quick unit, and his NP, while it does technically support the party, it is still something you want to be at least clearing the trash mobs out with, right? Maybe that's the intention for it. And so maybe if you wanted to either add more utility on it, if you don't want him to be a very damaging servant, you could just add, say, a 20% party-wide NP, which could definitely help everybody out a lot and would let him not overshadow the main 5-star supports, because, you know, I know Lisengel doesn't want some small free-to-play servant being better than, you know, Scotty or anything, but it would at least make him a nice viable option which is what I thought he was going to be when he dropped, you know, kind of like how Paracelsus or Asclepius often get used in arts team comps, more so Paracelsus because he does give the NP gain and the arts buff, so they can take more effective use out of that. But, you know, same difference. You can use them both in those team comps. I think if you gave that to Zhang Jue, he would be a very solid free-to-play option for quick units that we're looking for, because right now I think the best one we have is like Wu, probably, as a lower rarity, quote-unquote, quick support. Or if you wanted to do more damage, you could just give him a big fat attack buff for the entire party. Or maybe it's just for himself. I don't know. I'll let you guys discuss that in the comments down below. But moving over to his second skill, I really like this one. If he is going to be a low rarity support, I do like that he has the ability to give somebody a little bit of star weight, some massive 100% free crit damage for a turn, and he debuff cleanses them on a 5-turn cooldown. Maybe this could have been, you know, 3 hits of critical damage instead of just the 1-turn thing, but if you do time it correctly, you can still get that same effective value out of this. And remember, this 100% crit buff, that's Merlin's hero creation, that's Proto Merlin's skill, that is Scotty's quick crit damage, but it's not relegated to only doing quick crits. So you can use this for himself if you want Zhang Jue to do some pretty decent crits, or you could pass this off to another DPS and allow them to go ham taro, while also alleviating them from their debuffs. This is also very nice because let's say one of your supports gets down, they get skill sealed, and you are really hoping that, I don't know, whatever future godly quick support we were going to be getting, you know, quick Castoria, you wanted to go ahead and use her third skill for however broken that's going to be, but she got skill sealed. So now you can remove that from her. That's just very nice to have. It's just a nice little bit of utility that he's bringing to the table. And then we get to the third skill, which obviously 50% battery is very, very strong. No one is going to say that a 50% battery is bad, especially on a low rarity unit. I imagine this is why a lot of people were trying to make Zhang Jue work when he first came out on the JP side of things, and you can get him to work, especially because Ruler Scotty comes out, gives him a little bit more damage because she also gives you the attack buff that you can carry into all 3 nodes, and she gives you higher quick buff, so you have more NP gain for easier looping. But then we have the rest of the skill over here, which technically is not bad. It's an 80% chance to give himself Forest, Waterside, Sunlight, and Burning. These are all separate buffs, and they all last for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. This is where things get really interesting, because this will affect his NP. Basically, his NP gets debuffs that are more likely to connect because of his item construction passive skill that increases his own debuff success rate by 8%, which might come in handy if you're going up against someone with a lower magic resistance or something. You know, might just be a little clutch, but it'll affect what debuffs he puts on the enemy, which is good for his damage, but again, also technically does support the rest of the party members, especially if you're using a split team comp. You know, maybe he's your quick unit, but you have a arts unit DPS. Or you're using someone like Melusine or Tolmaius that can change their card type. And so being able to kind of adapt to that, I think, is very strong. And that's why I think he has some unique interactions with his own Bond CE, but other different servants you might want to bring in the party. His own Bond CE, Yellow Turban, is particularly good for this because it gives the entire party 10% NP damage and gives everybody 20% buff success rate while he's on the field. And because that's an 80% chance to proc plus the 20% buff success rate, it's now a guaranteed buff that he can give to himself, turning his NP to technically full power. And it's not all that bad, considering he's giving everybody the extra NP damage. Sure, I guess in a way you could also justify it as like, well, quick units can now do Black Grail farming now that we have double Ruler Scotty plus Oberon. And I guess if you're using Zhang Jue, this is just really baby version of Black Grail because it's 10%. But I think this is definitely more to be used in a support capacity. But to also shout out some servants that he would work well with, particularly because they will turn on his buff success rate if you don't have the Bond CE. Ozzy himself is a very strong single target unit. I did a little bit of like just kind of background gameplay earlier, like in the video or sometime around right now, where I brought him just because I was like, oh, well, Ozzy will turn on his third skill, and then, you know, he can give him the crit damage and everything. There's a little bit of synergy there. Ozzy can then, you know, also give him attack buffs and all that good stuff. You know, there's some type of synergy, I suppose, you know, gives everybody the NP gauge as well. Ozzy can't really use the arts and quick buff, but do you know who can? Lakshmi Bai. Lakshmi Bai is another AoE quick unit that buffs the entire party's buff success rate by 40% for 3 turns. So she will also fully turn on Zhang Jue's third skill, and they're both quick. So if you want something a little bit more synergistic, you could pair him with Lakshmi Bai over here. Although I know that Lakshmi Bai also has the same stipulation that she doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. Then I guess finally there's also Tesla. Tesla in and of himself, you could just think of him as like AoE Ozymandias. He's really good. Smacks him with that 20% buff success rate, which is exactly what he needs because that's what his Bond CE has. So you have some options for decent servants. I mean, Lakshmi Bai is not all that bad, but it's definitely more of a gimmicky team because you got Lakshmi Bai, Zhang Jue, then are you going to bring Scotty, Ruler Scotty, or are you just going to bring another kind of pseudo DPS buffer? It's more one of those things you do for fun if you're going to be going that route, but I guess Ozymandias and Tesla are also options, but again, that's a bit janky, but he does technically support them with his NP as well if you want to go look at that. And you guys can see right now that there are a ton of different debuffs that he gives them based on whatever battlefield type he has. For Forest, he hits him with Quick Down. Arts, it's Water Side down. Burning, you would have thought it was Buster's Psych. You thought Burning is crit down. Sunlight is the Buster down. These are all 20% values and they all last for 3 turns. And they do all proc first, by the way. So it does give him a little bit of extra damage, I suppose. But it's also why, instead of doing what I did with the Ozymandias thing, where I put Ozzy in front of Zhang Jue, because I wanted Zhang Jue to get the overcharge NP damage just out of curiosity to see how much he would do. You could just put him in front of, say, your other person's NP, and they'll get the extra bonus damage from whatever their card type is, especially if it is somebody that is turning on his third skill, like Ozymandias or Tesla. Or if you do snag his Bond CE, it just works really well if you want to use another quick DPS, which technically isn't too bad with, say, Ruler Scotty, because Ruler Scotty will give herself the attack buff, and then she'll also have the quick resistance down, so not too bad, I suppose. And on the overcharge, you can see that he does give himself 10% NP damage that procs first, which is really good. It does let him, I guess, play kind of nicely with Oberon, but I wish that stacked, you know? If it's only going to be 10%, come on, just let it stack like Muramasa or Jason, you know, these characters that get stronger as they go through the farming node. Just give him that little bit of a benefit of the doubt, please. But overall, he's not a bad servant. It's not like he's absolutely terrible, unusable. It didn't feel too bad using him when I was testing for the last few days for this video, but it does definitely feel like there's something missing, you know, like there's one piece missing for him to either be a looper. If they want him to do that, that would be more damage, or there's one piece of support missing if they do want him to be a dedicated support. I think in the future, we'll definitely see himself on the first skill give the entire party 20% buff success rate. Even though his Bond CE does it, they'll probably just give it to him anyway, because they know not everybody's going to have the Bond CE. I could definitely just see that being a thing. Or maybe you don't want to bring the Bond CE, right? Maybe you need to bring a K-Scope or something, or a Black Grail, or 2030 even. It doesn't just lock you into using the Bond CE, even though the Bond CE is very good. Or if they want him to go more into that support role, they could just let him give a 20% battery to the entire party. I think that would just be super nice for him. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day, and I'll catch y'all on the flippity floppity.